You're muted, Bishop.
There you go. There you go. All right, look at there. Great day, everyone, and welcome to Spirit in Mind, where we are committed to looking at current affairs with faith and mental health perspectives. And of course, I am Bishop Guy Robinson, and I am always blessed to have my colleague with me. Great day, Dr. Shepard.
Yes, good day, Bishop, and good afternoon to everyone who is out there on the East Coast, and good morning to all of our other watchers throughout the country and even international viewers that we have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Spirit in Mind family, for being with us. And we want to encourage you. Please feel free to let someone know we're here. There's several ways you can tune in today. And one of them is by, of course, hitting the share button at the bottom of your social media screen. And you can let others know and share this time of gathering as Spirit in Mind. We believe that it is something that can be helpful to all of us as the Lord gives us grace. And then Dr. Shepard can talk a little bit about one of our newer ways that you see on the screen there. Dr. Shepard, how else can they watch us?
Absolutely. So we've elevated, if you would, our approach, and we have created a true podcast. What we were doing previously was a broadcast, but this is a true podcast, and you can view this podcast at spiritinmind.vidflex.tv. So you want to make sure you go back. We're in the middle of a series right now. And so the series that we're calling it, or have called it, Living Your Best Life. And we're doing the SIP and C approach. And that stands for spiritual, intellectual, physically, socially, economically, and emotionally. SIP and C. And so you want to be able to go back to spiritinmind.vidflex.tv to make sure you catch up on those episodes. And we want to even thank those people who go back and replay. Bishop, we have so many people, and this is the truth, who reach out to me. I'm sure they reach out to you, Bishop, and they say, wow, that was a great episode. That was a great broadcast. And we now want you to go back and utilize and view on that particular platform, vidflex.tv, our podcast. And so in doing so, it just continues to broaden our reach. It strengthens our endeavor and passion for what we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we welcome you as you are coming in. We appreciate the chat line. And so there's so many different ways that we've been given the grace to stay in touch and to share with you. And we want to encourage you to let someone know, utilize them, and join us on the new broadcast or podcast location. And thank you for supporting and praying for and praying with us here at Spirit in Mind. We're grateful for Minister Kat Henderson, who is our engineer, making all these things happen behind the scenes. So we're grateful for her. Dr. Shepard, you are clean today. Backstage, I just need to say it again. You are clean. I have to step it up.
Oh, no, Bishop. It's in the Church of God in Christ world right now. We're going through one of the most pivotal times of our existence. And with that, people have availed themselves to be candidates for various offices of position within our great church. And I am one of those candidates. You won't hear me talk a lot about this on this particular platform because that's not the purpose of it. I try to make sure that things are kept in order. But I must say that during this time, we must pray for our church. Yes, this is election season, but let me tell you, this is still God's church, and we must be prayerful about the people who will be put into leadership because it's not just a popularity contest. We want to make sure that God's hand is upon the leaders who will operate in those offices. And so, yes, for the next few Saturdays, you'll see me dressed as I am offering myself as a candidate for one of those positions, which is the position of trustee. And so I count it a privilege and honor to be even selected through the screening committee to make it this far. So please pray for me. And so, Bishop, I'm a little clean today, but that's all right.
It's all good. Minister Henderson, please remind me to have my clergy vestments ready for next week's episode of Spirit in Mind. And full Episcopal choir attire.
Oh no!
So,
No.
no, but Dr. Shepherd, before we get into our series continuation today, we always look forward to the updates, and we know that we're still battling pandemic, and there's been a lot just on the news with rollouts and perhaps some conversation even in the city from which we broadcast about disparities of accessibility. Could you speak to any of those and update us? It's fact from fiction, et cetera, that kind of thing.
Absolutely, and Baltimore City is just one of the prime examples of the vaccine distribution debacle that is occurring. And I use that word debacle because the rollout was not as smooth as what we had anticipated it for it to be. We by now had anticipated to have vaccinated a certain number of people. And I know our current president, Biden, is looking to get at least 100 million people vaccinated in 100 days. And so he's still working hard at that. Here in Baltimore City Public Health Department, they experienced where they had over at least hundreds, I should say, of people who booked first-time appointments who should not have been eligible to book those appointments. How did that happen? Is that once persons got their first dose, like I did, some of these people, once they got the invitation for the appointment for the second dose, they forwarded that particular appointment to family members. You might well say, well, how do you know that's true? Well, I know it's true because I went to see the dentist, and my dentist said he was one of those people that did it. So it's not by, people think, my dentist, he admitted to me that was what he did. And so that's what people did. So that's how other people were able to get into those appointments. And so now they're having to backtrack and cancel appointments, which for many people that was discouraging because they finally were courageous enough to go get the vaccine. And so, yeah, that was a little bit discouraging. I will get my second shot next Friday on the 12th, and I'll be right here on the 13th to tell you how it is. I'll still be here. Amen. I'll still be well. Amen. I'll say that for a purpose because there are still conspiracy theories out there that say that the vaccine will somehow adversely affect you. And so we want to be clear about that anything that you take into your mouth, including vitamins, including even the food that you eat that could cause you to have food poisoning, there's always something that could necessarily go wrong. And when you're dealing with millions of people, you're always going to have 1, 2, 3, or whatever. And people tend to focus in on those particular things when they miss the whole 99% of everybody else was okay. And so I understand, again, I'm not belittling anyone. I'm sensitive to that, but I need to make sure we have a good dose of reality also. The vaccines do work. Johnson & Johnson is prepared to come out with theirs. Hopefully by the end of this month, they'll be able to get emergency use authorization. And I know some people have talked about whether Johnson & Johnson is as effective as the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine. Let me just tell you, people, it doesn't matter if someone is 72% effective versus 94.5 versus 95% effective. Those numbers really don't matter. Well, what does that mean? Well, I was taught in school that 95% is better than 72%, Dr. Shepherd. Let me tell you what the real deal is, again, to dispel the myth, is that these vaccines are effective in you beating the COVID-19 disease. That's important for me to highlight. It's not going to stop you necessarily from contracting the virus. If you contract the virus, the vaccine's job is to stop you from getting the illness that is killing so many people. That's what the vaccine is guaranteed to do. It's not going to stop you. I hope you all hear me on that. It's not necessarily going to stop the transmission of the virus. That's why we still have to wear our mask right now. But it is purposed to stop the disease that is filling up people's lungs with fluid, that is not allowing them to breathe, that is causing the neurological aspects to go awry, that's causing people to lose their taste and smell, and even causing the cardiac side effects. All that, this is what the vaccine is fighting against. So We want to make sure that we understand and be educated. And we're going to talk to you a little about that today, about intellect, wisdom, and knowing how to be able to discern myth versus fact. And so that's what I'm just doing a little bit today. So Bishop, that's what I have to say. I wanted just to give a shout out. My time is far spent because I don't want to eat up too much of this opening. But I just wanted to just give a shout out. The New York Times had a wonderful article regarding the women, the pandemic effect on women. And I was really blown away. And you look for me to post some things on my social media pages about this. It talks about betrayal and not burnout. Wow. That Black women, even white women, when you look at this, there was one stat in particular for Black mothers that 48, and this is my last point, 48% of Black mothers who said that the pandemic has had a major impact on their ability to pay for necessities like housing, utilities, and food. Wow. That's almost 50% of Black mothers. That's like 1 of every 2 Black women, all right, where they have been negatively affected by this pandemic, and it's caused them to have to figure out how they're going to pay for housing, utilities, and food. This pandemic is real. That's why we need to get the vaccine so we can put an end to this plague.
Very good, very good. I'm glad you referenced so many of those things. The New York Times article is interesting and powerful, and even the ongoing responsibility to be mindful and aware even after vaccination. Wow, so much helpful things, so many helpful things, and we pray that Spirit and Mind and our information that we're led to share is helpful to you in everyday life as you live and move and in these challenging times, and yet know that we have the victory and there's help and hope. And speaking of which, we want to talk a little bit, and I want to open up with Isaiah 1:18. Of course, we've been talking about living your best life, and now we're at living your best life intellectually. This is part 2 of that. There's a verse as we talk about living your best life intellectually. We've been talking about critical thinking skills. Isaiah 1:18, just to start off, the Lord speaks to the prophet Isaiah, and Isaiah speaks to the people of God on God's behalf, and says, "Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord." Not Isaiah, but says the Lord. And come now, let us reason together. That word reason in the Hebrew means to present our cases, to talk through with civility about our positions. And that really is what I want to use as we go into this subject today. My thesis is that the Lord and the scriptures encourage critical thinking. Encourage critical thinking. And that's what we talked about last week. We talked about our prayer to the Lord that Dr. Shepherd raised in terms of increase my capacity for knowledge, increase my capacity to know. And now how do we use it? Because the Lord and the scriptures here in Isaiah and in other scriptures, we're just opening up with Isaiah, but here he is encouraging critical thinking. And we gave some definitions, and we tried to write a couple of them down. We gave some definitions of critical thinking just to start us off. What is critical thinking? It is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. We talked about that definition last week, and any of these that resonate with you and stick with you can be helpful. It's also defined as the ability to think in an organized and rational manner in order to understand connections between ideas and facts. That's so very important, because just because an idea triggers a feeling, our feelings are not always indicative of what is factual. And so it's so important, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we continue. But critical thinking is also defined as assessing and evaluating evidence to support claims. And the most common definition that people tend to use is just thinking about thinking. Thinking about how I'm thinking, what I'm thinking, discerning what is motion from what is the actual experience. All of them taking all of that into context. And critical thinking, I want to again reiterate, is so important. Particularly last week we shared that it's a concern in the education arenas. The dictionary definition we gave last week, when you look up a word, it gives you a sentence so you can see it applied. And the sentence that Webster and Collins and other dictionaries use is professors often find it difficult to encourage critical thinking amongst their students. Dr. Shepard didn't make that sentence up. I didn't make that sentence up. It's the dictionary's applied sentence based upon actually some research in the area of education, pedagogy, and that kind of thing. So as we open up, the question becomes, why? Why is it difficult to encourage critical thinking? And there are two aspects of it, and that we'll get into. I want to suggest, just to get us off, this list is not exhaustive, but two challenges to critical thinking. One is trauma. And Dr. Shepard, we can please feel free to talk about that. And but we put up a definition of trauma. I think we can. But trauma can affect critical thinking. Critical thinking can be affected by trauma, which is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, or in a medical sense, which certainly Dr. Shepard can elaborate on, physical injury. So by trauma can affect critical thinking. And then the one that I'll probably deal with for the majority of our time is the other thing that can affect critical thinking is culture. And that's the thing that the teaching environment deals with a lot. Culture meaning the shared way of life of a people, the customs, the arts, the social institutions, the shared values of a group. So two things that can affect critical thinking. One is trauma. The other is culture. And in our culture, some have noted, and that in our culture, some have noted this proclivity to move towards sensationalism and to push emotional buttons. That's the significance of Webster Dictionary's 2016 word of the year was post-truth. Post-truth means that we are now considered to be living in a post-truth society, which means the accuracy of the reporting or the accuracy of the study is not as important as pushing the emotional buttons to get a desired effect. So that's the issue that we're dealing with, is that the culture is pushing towards almost a thesis that says, if I feel it, it must be factual. And we can put IJS and I'm just saying at the end of everything. And that clause seems to validate the rationality of everything else we just said. And so we're living in a post-truth society, if that analysis is accurate, and it certainly does have evidence to support it. But how do we balance that now? And so we're living in an age of conspiracy theories. You can say things, and you hear the conversations about QAnon and conspiracy theories, and you could just put it out there and provoke an emotional reaction, but it may not have substance and evidence to support that. But if we feel it, it must be real. And that's not only a societal problem, but that can become a theological problem, which we'll talk about. And so they're the two, just to get us, and certainly this list may expound. This is not exhaustive. I'm humble enough to say that. But these are the two areas we want to talk about in terms of things that can have an effect on critical thinking: trauma and culture. Dr. Shepherd, that's my opening meditations. Help us out here.
Yes, sir. So let's dig deeper. And so thank you to critical thinking, trauma, and culture. And so as we dig deeper, now let's look at trauma first. Yesterday, I was talking about the state of Black America and the state of Blacks in America. And when you look at what has happened to the Black community within our country, uh, critical thinking and how we are able to even work through the racism and the prejudices and the biases that are against Blacks. A lot of what is happening is a result of non-critical thinking. Um, yeah, it really hurts me when I think about a lot of the people who have biases against people because of their skin color or because of something that because it doesn't look like them, because they were born in a certain neighborhood, or classism. But a lot of it has to do with trauma. We as Black people have been traumatized for over 400 years. I mean, it's horrible. And when you think about where we are today, you would think that certain improvements would be present, but honestly, we are traumatized literally on a daily basis because of the various things that are continue to occur within our society. How is it that people are able to still believe that Black people have more resiliency within themselves in the field of medicine? Now, what do I mean by that? We are resilient people, but in the field of medicine, Black people don't get the same type of treatment as our white counterparts do. What are you talking about, Dr. Shepherd? Yeah, let's look at this. There are evidence or examples of where Black people who are in need of pain medication, they don't get the pain medication because, oh, they're Black, so they can go ahead. And the reason why this is really troubling me, all right, and I'm speaking so slowly because I don't want to get ahead of myself because it really bothers me, is that in medicine we've been trained to think critically, all right. We've been trained to think, how do I help the person without judging them? But yet we live in a society, and I hate to say it, I'm a part of that profession, where we have people who will not think critically about what we see beyond just the exterior. Wow. And so in doing so, a Black person can be in pain and we'll say, oh, they're okay, they'll tough it out, they're used to it. Really? That's what was said. And there's several examples of this in the field of surgery, in the field of pain medicine, or palliative care even. But we hear about these examples. And so these examples really hurt me when you think about how critical thinking or non-critical thinking is affecting even the care and treatment that you could be receiving from your physician, from your doctor. Yeah, let's think about it too. Critical thinking, when you're in need of help from a public service official, the police. I just call them something with the fancy title, the police. Use this will use critical thinking skills to be able to assist, whereas the people who are supposed to serve or protect you, they look at you based off of again, looking at the exterior, off of something emotional driven. It really tells me that there's a dearth, there is a deficit of critical thinking during this time. Case in point, I was trying to avoid this example. Our past administration within the White House. How is it that we're able to allow people to get off, so to speak, for a January 6th insurrection, but yet hold other people, such as people who are elderly? Now, I'm going to bring up his name, a little bit controversial. Don't shoot me, but I'm tough enough. I'm going to bring up Bill Cosby. You know, Bill Cosby, yes, he may have done those allegations. All right. But the man is over 80 years old and cannot see, and yet they will not release him from the maximum, whatever security prison that he is in, to be able to even avoid the coronavirus. But yet we still have people who have done things as worse or even worse than him who've been released. It's just backwards to me. And I know some of y'all may not like that example. I hear you. But when it comes to critical thinking, it really. I thank you, Bishop, for saying that the trauma really challenges us. What we have faced in our past, we'll be able to forgive somebody else, but oh no, that person hurt me deeply. Oh no. And we won't utilize that critical thinking skills that we have. And I hear you. It is tough. That's why we're bringing it up today. That's why we could not let this particular portion of the intellectual piece of living your best life just go unnoticed today, because we want to challenge you that in this year of 2021, there are going to come some points in your life where critical thinking is going to be required. It's going to cause you to be able to say yes to something and no to something else that can literally change your life. That's why we were talking about earlier the pandemic. For you mothers out there, you've had to make some critical decisions. You've had to do some critical thinking on how do you manage your households in the midst of this pandemic. So I know we've been traumatized what we see on TV. We've been traumatized what we've faced economically. We've been traumatized by even what we've seen health-wise and mentally, emotionally. Yeah, so I encourage you today to make sure that let's utilize our critical thinking skills and not allow the trauma of our past to stop us. Yes, it may affect us right now, but let's get healed from the trauma so that we can move forward.
Yes, and that's why critical thinking is so very important, because Dr. Shepherd has been talking about moments in which judgments are being made from emotional triggers or unsupported claims, and that is so very important, and it takes some time, and it takes some discipline. Because critical thinking has to be engaged without falling asleep, without saying it's boring because I don't feel the fight or flight adrenaline rushes. And those things can feel very real, and then the other can feel less real. But it's so very important that we acknowledge the effects of trauma on our critical thinking, so that we aren't just reacting to things that trigger past events, but we're treating the present, or as Paul put it, forgetting those things that are behind me and reaching. Yeah. He's not talking about the inability to recall cognitively or intellectually things from his past. Of course he's not, because in that passage, he just got finished giving his history as a Pharisee in Philippians. So he just finished a little bit of cognitive recall. So when he says forgetting, it doesn't mean that he's lost memory, but what he means in forgetting so that he can move forward, it means not allowing past situations to leave him in a place where he's making unfocused decisions about his future, or unrealistic decisions about his present and future based on irrational concepts that are now in his head. Sort of like a cognitive behavioral therapy kind of thing, that if I can adjust my thinking about something, it can change my behaviors towards something. And that involves critical thinking. And so what do you mean? Because I don't want to just use that term and assume that people know what it means. But critical thinking involves, yes, Jacqueline Shaw, understanding that everything is not black and white. And it's something that our school systems are dealing with. Again, on the campuses where I teach, critical thinking courses are a big deal across the board, because the critical thinking criteria is expanding in some circles beyond just being a thing you learn in logic class, to saying that critical thinking skills are applicable to virtually every other discipline in life and in the academy. And so I wrote down just a few components of critical thinking that might be able to give context to what we mean when we say that. But critical thinking involves, at least in a pedagogical sense, it involves analysis, interpretation, evaluation, explanation, open-mindedness, and self-regulation. That's just some of the categories. Again, these aren't exhaustive. I don't want to bore you with a whole semester's worth of lecture, but it's just some of the things. In terms of analysis, meaning critical thinking entails analysis. It means collecting and processing information. It means doing our research. I know we have these feelings and we put those thoughts out there and we're passionate about it. And sometimes people like our style of how we say it, our swag, if you will. But it's understanding that style is one thing and substance is another. And so analysis means do your research to see the accuracy of the statement that you're about to make. Interpretation means, how am I processing this information? What is the meaning from this? And then evaluation, meaning making decisions on available information. So my decision is not just coming from my emotional center, but my decision is now coming from having reached a conclusion. This kind of thing is what Paul meant in the scriptures, where he says, for I reckon, I reason that the sufferings of the present time, it means he's analyzed the data, he's interpreted his experience in a way, and he's considered his future possibilities. And he says, I reckon, I reason, I have critically thought about what I'm going through and where I'm headed, and I've come to the conclusion that though my feelings and trauma and the pain are real, I acknowledge those. I reason that where I'm headed is worth me having the hope of moving forward. I reckon that the sufferings of the present are not comparable to the glory that shall be revealed. And so it's not an emotional decision, but it's a rational decision that Paul is making. Explanation means being able to explain ourselves, communicate our findings clearly and reasonably. And open-mindedness means taking into account other possibilities and points of view. I could really stay there for a minute, because open-mindedness is so important to the ability to having civil discussion. And one of the things that we've lost in the last couple of years, and you've seen it on the national square and the political square, and even from presidential example, is the inability to have civil discussion without personal insults. Those kinds of things. In logic, we call it the fallacy of ad hominem, which means attacking the person instead of dealing with the issues. It's a fallacy of critical thinking, but it's commonly shown in our national discourse. You can't have a conversation without taking it personally. Open-mindedness means I'm ready or willing to consider another point of view that may enlarge, expand, or redefine my perspective. That's what that means. And it means I have the ego strength to not take a different point of view as a personal attack.
Right.
That's what that takes. And so oftentimes when discussions devolve into personal insults and physical threats, it's usually indicative of a lack of ego strength that cannot engage in a conversation with different perspectives without taking it as personal insult. And that's very human. That's just how we go. The Lord had to deal with the prophet. You remember in the scripture, some of you may remember when Samuel took something personally in ministry, when Israel asked for a king and all that, and Samuel went back and said, Lord, they have rejected me. And the Lord said to Samuel, they have not rejected you. You have taken this way. This has nothing to do with your ego. They have rejected me. Think about what that means psychologically. They have some issues that are bigger than you. They have some stuff that preceded you. They have some stuff that is bigger than your personality. They really have issues with life. They really have issues with me. That helps some people when you understand that some people don't leave you necessarily because you were wrong. Some people have their own stuff.
Right.
And it gets triggered and they do it for their own reason. So God has to help the prophet to open his mind to say, listen, this is really not about you. I know you have to be invested in it because you care, but every helping professional has to have this kind of thing to say, there's some stuff here that I can't take personally. When you get resistance, when you get avoidant behaviors, when you get personal attacks because you bring up difficult stuff. He says, you have to have ego strength at a certain level to have open-mindedness. And so, but I could stay there for a minute. But lastly, self-regulation is the ability to monitor. And perhaps a great example is and then Dr. Shepherd, I need your insight and input. But there's a biblical example I wrote down. Minister Kat, if you can help us out. The biblical example is in Acts. Here's critical thinking. Acts 17 talks about the Bereans, or the people in the region of Berea. And it said, after Paul and Silas shared the gospel with them, look at this. Those in Berea, or the Bereans, were more fair-minded. They were more open-minded to what Paul and Silas were presenting than those in Thessalonica, where they ran them out and it got physical. How were they more open-minded? Because they received the word with all readiness. And here it is. Here's the critical thinking. And then searched the scriptures on their own daily to find out whether these things were so. So the Bereans were open-minded researchers and critical thinkers. And that's probably the best biblical example that the Lord would allow me to know and see, that they could engage in conversation with different perspectives and different views and be more civil than the experience in Thessalonica.
Wow. That
takes a certain amount of ego strength,
yes,
not to take it personally, to let it devolve. When it devolves into insults, and I'm sorry to say, but you start calling people Sleepy Joe and putting titles and all that stuff. When it devolves into that, you've really, really unintentionally perhaps shown that there's a lack of ego strength there to hear different views without taking it personal.
Wow. Wow. Bishop, you're helping me personally, even during this time. I mentioned earlier that it is campaign season in the Church of God in Christ. And one of the things that we have been challenged to do is to critically think about our next move. And it requires ego strength. Man, Bishop, you are hitting a home run today, like you do every day. But let me tell you, that is so important. And you're helping me because I have to realize that, and again, I can just speak for myself, that I have to exercise a certain amount of ego strength, that even if attacks do come, or even if challenges do come my way, that I cannot take them personally. I have to be able to stand on the merits of what God has given me to do, what God has called for me to do. I want to challenge someone out there that you're being faced with certain obstacles or challenges on your job, even within your church ministry, even within your own family. But God will give you the ego strength to think critically about it. Take a step back. We're telling you today, yes, it may have hurt your feelings. Yes, you may not have liked what they said. Take a step back today and allow yourself to say, you know what? It really isn't even about me. I would even bet, Bishop, man, you got me stirred up now, that most of the insults that come our way really have nothing to do with you. Truthfully. You know, when I sit back and I think about the various things that have occurred within my life, yes, some of them were personal attacks, but when you look back at it, it's like, well, actually, they were angry at something else, and I just happened to be in the way, or I just happened to be a casualty along the road. What I'm going to ask God for today, and I hear somebody already saying, "Give me strength, God." I hear you, but and in addition to the Lord giving you strength, you need to ask God for the prayer that we had last week. Give an increase in your capacity to know. Know what? Know how to think critically. All right. Leaders need people around them who can think critically. You need to be in a group of folks who, yes, are not always emotionally charged to get you revved up, they said, or riled up. You need to make sure that you find yourself to be amongst leaders, shows such as this, broadcasts such as this, that will allow you to think critically as you're moving forward. Bishop, that is just so on point. Let me just say,
Dr. Shepard, can I,
yeah.
my ego strength, I even want to be clear that I'm not talking about arrogance. I'm talking about confidence in who we are and who God made us to be. It means, if you want to put it in, if those of you are familiar with this, in Ericksonian or Erik Erikson terms, it means knowing who I am. If you want me to put it biblically, it is what Paul alluded to in 1 Corinthians 15. He says, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am." It's knowing your journey, it's knowing your weaknesses, it's knowing your history and your flaws. Paul recites those. I had some issues. I was a Pharisee among Pharisees. What Paul essentially says is, I was sincerely wrong. I was sincere, but my reasoning was flawed. The Lord humbled me on the road to Damascus and changed me. And I've forgotten, but I haven't forgotten. Meaning, I'm no longer a captive to my weaknesses and challenges. And I don't live with that, if you will, proverbial monkey on my back, always enslaved by my mistakes. But I do remember them, and I don't forget where I've come from. And by that way, I'm still open to being and becoming and transformation. So I can sit down, and Bob says sometimes Paul sat down with them and explained to them, and heard the guy. So I can listen. So ego strength doesn't mean arrogance. It means knowing by now, this is my identity. This is my purpose. This is my perspective. I'm a human, and it's still being sharpened as iron sharpens iron. And so it takes strength to do that. So that's not weakness. What you saw at the Capitol building, I don't mean to bash, but I'm just trying to say why it's so pervasive in the culture. What you saw was, you will never, the line that was said was, you will never get what you need by showing weakness. And strength was shown as physical occupation. That actually was a statement of ego insecurity. Because ego strength means just that. I know exactly who I am. And even if I hear your dissenting opinion, it doesn't mean that I am conceding and saying I totally say it. I may not. But it means that I'm open to hearing other points of views without taking them as personal attacks. That's I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah, absolutely. God help us. That's all I got to say after that, Bishop. God help us. Help us to be able to do that. We got to get to the other one, the culture, because that also is an obstacle that can be affected by critical thinking. Bishop, let me just give this real quick example, if you don't mind. I was blessed on a previous broadcast to talk about the Good Samaritan, and I think that this is actually a very good analogy as to how critical thinking can be affected through culture. In Luke chapter 10, it talks about the Good Samaritan, where the man was robbed on his way and was left on the side of the road to die. He was beaten, wounded. And as he walked along the way, as people walked along the way, a priest came by. And as the priest walked by and saw the man lying there about to die, the priest kept on his way and did not help the man. Wow. I can only imagine what was going through his head. Was he utilizing critical thinking skills at the time? Was he assessing? Was he interpreting? Was he evaluating? Was he explaining? Was he having open-mindedness? Was he using self-regulation as he walked past that man? The priest, the one who is called to serve and protect. I talked about that earlier. Then the Levite walked by. These are people of ministerial positions, all right? They walked past the man that was traumatized, the man that was beaten, the man that was laying there dead. And their culture did not allow for them to stop and provide care for this man. Oh, that bothers me, Bishop. But then thank God for the Good Samaritan who saw this man lying there of a different ethnicity, if you would, and took upon him to bandage up his wounds, take him to the end. And the Bible says that he took his own wages for that whole day to pay for him to stay in the inn for his wounds to be nursed. And from my understanding, that wounds there really is speaking to trauma. So many times we have been traumatized. And so, yes, I'm using trauma in a different way now. Trauma is one of the things that stops us from critically thinking, but now I'm using it as a way in which we've seen trauma occur, but people don't want to help because of culture and stopping them from critically thinking on how we can mend these traumas, mend these wounds together. And so I'm thankful for people out there such as you, that you're not going to allow what culture may even say. Church culture. Oh, man, don't let me get started right there. Yes, sir. Bishop, you pulled. All right, it's time to pull by context. Even church culture will have you not thinking critically and have you spinning around, you getting dizzy, not even know who you are. We buying that. We want you to know in 2021, you're going to be thinking intellectually and even critically, and you will be in leadership circles where people are not intimidated. Again, it's all talking about ego strength. You will be able to walk in confidence, yet be respectful, yet be sensitive, so that that does not invade or even negatively impact your relationships with those leaders or with those people who you serve. Man, Bishop, I'm gonna stop right there.
Yeah, and that's good, and it involves knowing the difference and the context of our conversations. We talked last week about the legal allotment for what they call puffery, which is the ability to use hyperbole to sell something. Hyperbole, by definition, doesn't have necessarily researched accuracy. It just means I'm saying it. And you have to know the difference between when we're speaking from the head and from the heart. And that's one of the things that we do in teaching critical thinking courses in academic settings. In our culture, we say stuff, like, man, how was it? It was all that. Well, that's hyperbole, because all that is a universal statement. But we know what you mean. Right. It was the sun, moon, the stars, the cars, everything. No, I just meant that I enjoyed it. Or you went to a place that was maybe half full, and you say, how was it? Man, wasn't nobody there. Well, that's hyperbole. I know what you meant. And in everyday conversation, that's fine. But when you are in a position of authority and influence, or engaging in a significant conversation, whether that's as a teacher, whether that's as a parent, whether that is as a president, whether that is as a community leader, then words and accuracy matter. Because now the accuracy of your data has to be there. So I just put down just a few things that can nurture critical thinking that I hope to be practical. So how can we in the culture, and I want to use that intentionally because critical thinking has to be nurtured. You know, we will either nurture emotionalism and high emotional reactions, or we will nurture critical thinking. We can, but so how do you nurture critical thinking? And there's a couple of things. One is, and you touched on them, Dr. Shepherd, allow questions. Cultivate an atmosphere that allows questions, whether you give it in a particular time to say, are there any questions? Or what is because you want to hear from people. I know that sometimes we're in environments, and some of us have been in those environments where it is because I said so. If you're on a battlefield fighting for your life, and the sergeant says that because I said so, it's good, fine, because the objective, you don't have time for that. But if you're in life and dealing with your kids or dealing with those that you have a measure of responsibility for, you want to have a moment when you are in an atmosphere where if they don't have clarity or have discrepancy, they can ask questions. You want to know the difference between, if there is any, between intention and interpretation. So when you communicate something, we can only communicate our intention. We cannot control the interpretation of the listener. Right. So it's good to allow questions so that you can know where their head is as you have just shared your point of view. So even in a classroom, and I know we have a couple of teachers and pedagogues that are here, there's always a moment when a good teacher says, any questions? Because you want to know how is what I'm presenting registering with those. As a pastor teaching Bible study, are there any questions? What is your reaction? So allow questions. Number two is ask open questions. Open questions are questions that encourage a person to give an answer other than yes or no. You just said something. Did you like it? Well, they could say yes. An open question would be, what are you thinking about this?
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? That's asking open questions. Number three, push for evidence. When people make a claim, ask them if they have any support for that. That's what happened in this election, and it was a point of contention because you had persons making allegations and then trying to pursue legal recourse. Well, before it goes to court and ties up the court system, there has to be sufficient evidence for your claim to bring it to trial. That's not a conspiracy, that's critical thinking. Right. If you tie up the courts with every undocumented or unvalidated assertion or claim, nothing would ever get done. Right. So there must be a certain amount of support for the legitimacy of your claim. So when people make statements, whether it be church ain't no good, what is your claim for that?
Right.
And how do you support that? What is your argument? And how broad is your base for that claim? You went to two churches and had bad experiences, so you make a universal statement off of a limited amount of experience. Your research methodology leaves something to be desired because you're making a universal statement from provisional experiences. That's what critical thinking means. Push for open push for evidence. Number four, be open to other perspectives. Can nurture critical thinking because, again, it has to be cultivated. And number five, discuss current affairs for practical application. Lest all of this just be theory without practice. Ask people questions. Sometimes in the classroom, I utilize that moment. What do you think about what just happened? I don't tell them. I want to get their reactions. And then that can let you know where you need to begin or that kind of thing. But again, this isn't an exhaustive list. We have many scholars that are watching today. I by no means profess to have apprehended, but these are just a couple of things that maybe get the fire started because I reiterate that critical thinking in an age of sensationalism and in the midst of the various traumas that happen to us personally and collectively, critical thinking has to be nurtured, cultivated, parented, mentored, encouraged. That's just my reflections, Dr. Shepherd. Please take us from here.
Absolutely. And I just, as they say, kind of reset the room. I just want to acknowledge those persons who are out there, the viewers. First Lady Elizabeth Rohn, she's watching all the way from California, Bishop. And so again, we have different folks in time zones out there. She is, I see, sharing with her viewership and with her network what we've been talking about today. So thank you. I want to acknowledge all those others who have been out there sharing. So please continue to do this because the more that we're able to share about how to nurture critical thinking and what critical thinking is, it's going to help us. You know, one of the things that was challenged to me is that we're going to have to start teaching on what truth is.
Yeah.
You know, isn't that amazing? Now we're going to have classes on what truth is. We're going to have to, Lord, you know, talk about sin and revival. We need a revival on what truth is. You know, it's amazing. I smile a little humorous about it, but it is absolutely true that we need a resurgence, if you would, of the truth and how to be able to rightly divide what is factual versus what is myth, and not allow that to cause fear. And I think we've already talked about that, how a lot of emotional thinking is ramped up in fear and is wrapped up in how do I not allow this other person to quote unquote take me over, even though that's not even the motive of what or intentions of what many of the people who they're afraid of. Let's not live in fear, you all. Let's study. And these are going to be kind of my parting words. Let's study. Let's make sure that we are challenged this year. Read that book. Read that essay. As you've heard me on the show over and over again, I am just reading more and more because I want to open up my mind. One of the things, and I will end with this, is I've seen how God has opened up my mind since I moved from Chicago. When I go back home at times, people did say, "Wow, you know, I didn't know you think like that, or know that you've grown." What critical thinking will do, it will help mature you. It will put you into circles that you may not even think that you're ready for, because people understand that you're going to approach a situation not based off of just pure emotion. And yes, we do need emotion at times, absolutely, but it should not be the sole driver behind what we do. We have to have people who can steady the waters, and that's what we need right now. People who can steady the waters. We've been thrown such curveballs this year. And so as we critically think on how to be able to navigate what God has given for us to handle, it will then be beneficial for you. You're going to come out on top. People are going to look for you. People are going to ask for your help. You're wondering why people are asking or leaning on you. That's because they see something inside of you that allows for you to think critically and challenges them. So be prepared for that as you continue to exercise these skills and nurture these skills. God, I ask for you to nurture these critical thinking skills within me, because even as I move forward in my profession and learn not to take it personally, and you'll learn how to be able to approach such difficult situations, such as Solomon did. When after he was crowned king, he had to make a decision upon the woman who came to him, who had rolled over her own baby, and then tried to switch or swap. You've heard about stories, even present day, about parents swapping babies. Let me just let you know that's been happening a long time ago. And the woman smothered her own baby, then try to put the other woman's baby, who was sleeping in the same house as her, under her, and then put the dead baby underneath the mother. Solomon was wise. He was a critical thinker, And to be able, I don't have the time to tell you the whole story, but in the end, the right mother was chosen to be back with the right baby. And that required critical thinking. So may God bless you. Remember us, spiritinmind.vidflex.tv. We want you to go back. All those who are watching today, please go back and look at previous episodes to get caught up, because we want you to live your best life. God is calling for us to live our best life in 2021. Yes, you can live your best life in the midst of a pandemic. I'm a living witness that that is true.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shepherd. Thank you, Spirit and Mind family. Listen, we haven't exhausted today's discussion. The pastor in me would say this, do your research, do all of that, but make sure, don't skip, please don't skip the importance, because this is a challenge in our generation and in our culture. Don't skip the importance of mentoring. You need a pastor. You need a mentor, even as you gather information. Information without proper processing can lead to an unhealthy place. And so I think it was Maxine Rush who asked a very important question. We live in an age, post-truth is an age where our culture says that there is no absolute truth, and all truth is relative. And thus you hear the popular term of the pop culture, this is my truth. That is a direct correlation to the predominance of individualism as a value in Western culture. And there is no separating. In theology, we call it the seats in Leiden, or your station in life affects theological interpretation. While we tend to interpret things in a very individualistic kind of way, I'm not bashing that. I'm just helping us to understand that culture is that, even while we're reading a book, the Bible, that comes from a collectivist culture. And so we have to balance this culture in which we live, because we're citizens of the kingdom of God, but we live in the kingdoms of men. And so as we balance those, in one kingdom, truth is absolutely relative and fluctuating and provisional. And then in the kingdom of God, there is such a thing as the truth of the Lord, which shall stand forevermore. And there are certain immutable standards and postulates and theorems. So we have to be open-minded and yet contend for not a faith, but the faith, Jude said, that was once and for all delivered. And so that's why it needs to be mentored, so that we can rightly divide the word of truth. Again, I said last week, I'll say it again, information can be Googled, but wisdom must be mentored and imparted. And so I want to encourage you to continue to find your house of faith. Stay in contact with your pastor, with your accountability circles, with your mentor. That's why, even though you can buy a textbook, there's nothing like having a teacher that can help you go through the textbook to extract and apply certain things. Just like you can have a Bible. It's nothing like having a person who can sit down like Philip did with the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8 and show the way of God. And so that's critical thinking. Critical thinking is not an individual experience. It is a corporate experience, because iron sharpens iron, and we grow by that interaction. We hope this has been helpful. We're talking about living your best life. We talked about living it spiritually. Today we continued in talking about it intellectually. Next week, next time we'll move to the P of the sip and tea, and we look, which is physically correct, Dr. Shepherd.
Yes, sir.
And
yes,
we look forward. Please tell somebody we're here, and please let someone know that we are sharing. And thank you for joining us and being with us on Spirit and Mind.